everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Wonderful to have you here on this podcast, or I should say, with this podcast that's here for you to figure out how to find the right kind of mental health care, how to get out of our own way because of stigma around getting mental health care, and what are some of the options that people have for treatment. So today I have a lovely guest. Katie Babcock is a lovely, lovely human, very kind and aware. So let me tell you a bit about Katie. Katie Babcock is a board-approved licensed clinical professional counselor and a national certified counselor in Baltimore, Maryland. Katie is trained in EMDR, which folks, we will have an episode on that, and holds certifications as a certified trauma professional and an ADHD certified clinical services provider. Katie, I might need to have you back a few more times to talk about each of those.
Anytime.
She is, right. Thank you. She's the founder of Counseling for Professionals, a private mental health practice specializing in supporting the mental wellness of adult professionals. As a professional and high achiever herself, and someone who has experienced burnout multiple times, Katie is on a mission to support adult professionals, businesses, and organizations do the following: overcome and prevent individual and systemic burnout, huge right now, huge. Heal unresolved trauma and PTSD, understand attention differences and difficulties, lots of that, support those struggles with substances, and create space and honor grief. I'm going to read the rest of this, folks, because I think this is helpful too. Katie began her career at Shepherd Pratt Health System, the nation's largest private nonprofit provider of mental health services. That's a huge organization. She's trained and worked in various treatment settings, including inpatient facilities, long-term substance abuse programs, intensive outpatient programs, and private practice. That's why I wanted you to know that, folks. Katie has a real depth and breadth of understanding of different places where people can get help. She's a Baltimore native, a former two-sport collegiate athlete, and a recovering adult child of an alcoholic with an ACEs score of 7, which, folks, we will talk about ACEs. I could have you back for that too. Katie, it's going to be a little part-time job here being on the podcast. Katie is an activist for the destigmatization and anti-pathologization of mental health. Welcome, Katie Babcock. Thank you so very much for bringing your wisdom and your heart here to us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. So good to be talking with you again. And I love this new podcast because I think it's so much about advocacy. It's so much about learning and teaching and supporting the consumer, the average person coming to therapy. So just happy to be here again.
Oh, thank you. Well, yes, it is a welcome back. I have another podcast,
Mm.
folks, that is for mental health professionals, and Katie was kind enough to join us there and now is joining us here. So welcome back. Thank you, and lovely to
Thank you.
see you again. And folks, if you're only hearing Katie, she's just got the best smile. So very, very warm,
Thanks.
very lovely. So Katie, you're there, as I said, we could have you talk about many things, and if you're open to it, we will. But right now, the purpose of the podcast today is how do we help people who are hesitant to get mental health treatment? What do they need to do? What do they need to know so that they can move in that direction? I was going to say get out of their own way, but that sounds like, sort of blaming the victim or blaming the person who's struggling. I don't mean it in that way. But how do we help people get around that issue?
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic topic. I think some common reasons that people have difficulty coming and seeking treatment. And I also want to name that those reasons have been very legitimate in the past, right? So these are reasons that, people didn't necessarily make up, but have been informed by culture, have been informed by their family of origin, have been informed by their communities. And so some of those barriers, they were real for a long time. And our field has to and is doing a good job of, I would say, definitely over the past 10 years, doing a lot of destigmatization work, normalizing many, many things that people are experiencing. And so I think, people may be hesitant to seek out therapy now, I would say, in a supportive way, like you can just seek out information about therapy now. Like this podcast is a great example of like What is therapy? What do I ask when trying to find a therapist? If I do have a barrier or if I do have a reason why I don't want to go to a therapist, I think you can now find information that could maybe provide you insight or knowledge into how that doesn't have to be a barrier anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that you've said that people had these concerns about getting therapy for good reason. I can't tell you how many times, folks, and I'm sure Katie, you've heard this too, and I'm sure all of you who are listening, I would be surprised if any of us listening, this is like a double negative, haven't heard something negative
Yeah.
about therapy. It's for crazy people, it's too expensive, therapists are crazy too. And, there are just a lot of myths that people carry around with them. And some of them may have been accurate at some point, but
Yeah.
they're not now. It's what therapy is has changed so much, even since I've been in the field. So, to your point, there might have been a reason before. Hopefully, that doesn't exist. It might in an individual's family, it might in a community, but
Yeah.
thank goodness now there are virtual options. Nobody ever has to know if somebody is concerned. And surprisingly, I've heard several people say to me over the last few years in particular, they just tell people now they're going to therapy, and the response isn't, oh, what's wrong with you? The response is, that's great. So I hope that that can be the case for our listeners as well.
Yeah.
So, what would you say are your definitions of stigma?
That's a great question. I definitely want to get into it. The other thing I wanted to name, like just even you sharing, Margo, that, people saying like, oh, I go to therapy. Like, yes, we absolutely want to normalize it. Me as a therapist, I go to a therapist. I freely tell clients that because I want to normalize it. I want to normalize it on behalf of being a client. I want to normalize it to my clients that like we can all go to therapy. It's very similar to going to the dentist. 15 years ago, when I started in my career as well, I probably would have been hesitant to say that. So just want to even disclose that's a real thing and that people can now are starting to say that, just like I'm going to my PCP, I'm going to the dentist.
It's
So thank you
another
for that.
healthcare provider.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so how I sort of understand stigma and how I understand what brings people to have these ideas. So stigma would really, in its simplest form, is just some negative connotations attributed to therapy. So you sort of named, utilizing words like that's the crazy person. We don't talk about that. There's something wrong in that household. That person's just not, that person's off. They're not right in the head. But so not only have we seen these really unhelpful verbalizations around people struggling with mental health, we've also seen it. So there's a lot of media, there's a lot of movies, there's a lot of television shows that I would say have not done, I would say 90% of them have not done a good job at reflecting what the therapeutic process is. And now I think it's our job as therapists, as people in the mental health world, to really reflect and be models of what like really good therapy is, where boundaries should be. Boundaries in movies don't really make good movies or TV content because if a therapist is just doing their job, it's pretty non-conflicty. So, not that's a word, but I think part of what the stigma is really looking at how do I feel about therapy? Why do I feel that way? What were the messages I received about people who went to therapy, whether it's from my family, whether it's through culture, whether it's through religion, and really sort of asking, like, is that always true? Does that have to be true now? Is that true now? So I think those are ways in which unhelpful stigma has really influenced people.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And that list that you gave of things that people will say, they'll also say, well, you're weak. I'm
Yeah.
not weak. I don't need a therapist. I can handle this myself. I want to do this myself. I'm a strong person. And I don't know about you, Katie, but I feel this way about myself and about other people, that to connect to the things that are hard, to talk about the things that are hard, to open our hearts up, to let somebody else sit with us and be a witness of what we've experienced, to be that vulnerable takes incredible strength. For me, it's way easier just to be a little clamshell and keep things quiet inside. I have a
Yeah.
part of that in myself, but I'll tell you, it's that vulnerability that helps me see things differently, process things differently, understand things differently, let somebody else in who can give me a completely objective, different perspective. So I think it's the opposite of weakness. I
Mm.
think it takes great courage. So I appreciate all you said about that. So you also said it's our job as therapists to help people understand and to talk about what is really good therapy. What do you think is really good therapy? I love that. How do you define really good therapy? There's a lot of ways you could answer that one, right?
Yeah. Going a little bit back to your previous episode of like good fit, right? So one of the things that I do want sort of the person listening to this episode who's sort of considering therapy is that it needs to be a good fit, right? Like you and the therapist need to be a good match. And how we define that is, I think, individual, but I think sometimes you can just feel it, right? You can feel when something's off with a person, and you can feel when there's some vibe and energetic sort of like back and forth. And so to the person sort of listening, going like, but how would I know? I think there are friends that you vibe with. There are peers or colleagues that you're like, I really like that person. I think you can start to feel that when you're meeting with a therapist. And so knowing like good therapy can begin and can grow from like it being a good fit. If you go to a therapist and very early on you're like, there's something off here. I would say listen to that. Like that's okay. There's not everybody's going to be a good fit. Some people's styles or temperaments are different than maybe what the person is looking for. You know, as a person looking for therapy, you can ask yourself, like, do I want to process or do I want resources? Right? So resources are like coping skills, strategies, you know, discernible, like here are the things I'm working on. Processing can really be like reflection, insight, and it's typically a combination of both. But if you're going into therapy and how can I find a good therapist, I think starting with what is it that I'm looking for? And in terms of good therapy, I would say that a really good therapist is able to, from the very beginning, from hey, hello, is able to effectively communicate and share like how they do therapy. So I don't even ask a client in intake, like what brings you in until like 20 minutes in the session because I'm going over like how do we work together? How do you get in contact with me? What do we do in this space? Because I want to start with, I really look at it from like, I want to be a reliable, consistent person in this new client's life. And so in order to do that, I need to start with like, what are we doing here? And so I think from the client perspective, that can give clients a sense of like, okay, like Katie sort of told me the structure and the rules, and like I know what to expect from her, and she knows, what to expect from me, and we're sort of agreeing upon how we're going to work together. I think that is like a reflection of solid therapy, is like we both aren't confused about what's happening here. Yeah, that's sort of how I would define it.
Hmm. That's beautifully articulated. And folks, you'll notice that Katie didn't speak to a particular kind of therapy. And we've done a whole lot of that yet on this podcast. This is more so for how do you pick a decent therapist? How do you look for goodness of fit? What is good therapy? Do you stay with somebody even if you don't think, no, we don't have a great vibe, but I'm here and I couldn't get in with somebody else right now. And, or maybe I don't know the difference, but you're talking about clarity, having some kind of mutual agreement, having an understanding, and nobody is confused about what does therapy look like. The client knows what they're supposed to do, which sounds kind of silly, right? Do I come in? Do I lie down on your couch? Do I sit on your couch? Do I sit here? Do I look at you? What do I call you? Do I call you doctor? Right? How do I get a hold of you? All of those things are get answered in good therapy. And I would agree with you on the front end so that both people are understanding what is our mutual agreement. So thank you for that. I think that's a great way to think about the structure of therapy. And then whether you do EMDR or cognitive behavioral therapy or something else, all goes into this framework, but this is the infrastructure, folks, that we're trying to lay the groundwork for on the front end. So that's wonderful. So, the barriers that keep people from coming into treatment, you mentioned some of them are individual beliefs and some of them are systemic. So, if it's coming from our church, our culture, our family, our friends, how do we get around that?
Yeah, yeah. So there's cost and financial barriers. There's, yep, the stigma and the cultural beliefs. There's access and availability, right? So we talked a little bit about telehealth and how that's really helped with access, lack of awareness and knowledge. So, like, what are we doing in therapy? What is therapy? And then time and practical constraints. And so these are some, I would say, bold topics, or those are the overview. When we're looking at stigma and cultural beliefs, I think one of the things is doing a little bit of reflection, and maybe like reflection is not quite there yet. Maybe somebody's not able to reflect, like, why do I feel this way? I would also name that, like, if there's any part of their spirit that's sort of like, maybe would I like to go to therapy? Like, I would say listen and lean into that part. And I think that part is pretty wise and is maybe looking for support, looking for healing, and maybe hasn't gotten it in the places that they thought they were going to. So, whether it's a community group or a religious affiliation or a mom's group, right? Or HR, maybe they're like, I'm needing a little bit more. I think one of the ways that I think really indirectly brings people in is just listening to others. So seeking out and looking for people that maybe look like you, sound like you, have some shared similarities, like listen to what they're saying. Are they talking about going to therapy? Are they talking about like things that they've struggled with? And so they can look like you, they can come from your same cultural background, and also keep seeking out who else is talking about this. Are there any people in my world or who I look up to who are talking about struggles, who are talking about like the same fears or the same, like, I was scared to go to therapy too? I think that can be a really solid portal into helping you with your internal stigma, is just listening for others talking about this.
Hmm. It's a beautiful way to present it, right? That and to think about it, that even if the people in our immediate world don't seem to understand or support therapy, there will be somebody out there. And if we can dial in and pay attention and be open to hearing that from people, that's great. And sometimes it might be coming from people out in the media or other places that
Yeah.
people will look up to your point and that they have gone to therapy. How important do you think it is for people to talk to the therapist in advance to help them get around some of this issue of stigma?
Yeah, I think it's pretty important. I know that some therapists maybe don't have that like initial consultation, that 15 minutes. If that's the case, because if that's like a business model dynamic, I encourage people, like, look them up. Like, how do we learn anything about anybody these days? Maybe they don't have that free consultation, but they have a lot of media content, right? Maybe they have a media content, maybe they do a blog. Look on their website. If they have a website, see if you can get a sense of the feel of this therapist and how they practice just by sort of researching them a little bit. I do think a lot of therapists do offer the 15-minute consultation. I offer it myself because, we can actually learn a lot in 15 minutes. We can sort of figure out the logistical components, and it's okay if a person's like, I just don't think it's a good fit for me, Katie. It's like, great. Not only is that great that you know that, I will give you 3 referrals for somebody who I think could be a better fit. So that's another thing I want to share with the average person. Like, therapists, most of them will give you referrals to somebody else. We're like a community that's like, if it's not us, we will help you find the people that it is. So also just knowing that, like, it could not be a good fit, and that's okay, and we'll help you find a good fit.
Right, exactly. And if we don't interview or have a conversation or check the vibe,
Yeah.
and we don't communicate, this doesn't feel like a good fit, boy, we can collectively get stuck in something that's not going to move us forward. So I love that you brought that up.
Mm.
So if someone is listening right now and they feel really hesitant, I mean, we're right now today, we are addressing those who feel some hesitancy, which I hate to say it's still in this day and age because of our culture. There are a lot of people for whom that's true. What are some things that they can be doing, thinking about? What is the first step to take?
Yeah. So I'll sort of go back to what I shared a little bit earlier, because I do share this with every client. Like, we therapists don't come to clients and like knock on their door and we think therapy could be good for you. Like, clients come to us, and clients are answering a calling inside of themselves that is seeking support and that is seeking validation and is seeking to be heard and is seeking to be seen and is seeking to heal. And so, if somebody listening right now is feeling very scared, or I'm not sure that this is the right time, I just want to name that's okay. There's no, this is the right time, or there's no like, you have to do it now. But and I would say, keep listening to that part of your spirit that is asking for support, asking for healing, because I think that's a really wise part of all people. I think anyone who's ever gone to therapy has listened to that part of themselves and go, I would like a little bit of support. So that would be the first step, is keep listening to that part, whether it motivates you to call in an hour or to call in 5 years, that's okay. And then going back to that other sharing is like, there's so much information available, going to the internet, asking the question, if I were to go find a therapist in my area and I'm struggling with these things, who would that be? Therapists are doing a really good job of trying to name what their specialty is and be a good match for people seeking them out. So I think that's also a good space, as well as, if you are feeling comfortable enough to talk to family or friends, like, word of mouth referrals are great. In fact, in our industry, that's how so many people find their therapist. It's like, oh, you're seeing my best friend, Katie. And I'm like, I don't know if I am or not, but I'm
Yeah,
glad you're
right.
here. So
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. But
I
so,
didn't know that, but okay. Yeah,
right.
right. Mhm.
Right.
It
So
happens.
if you have a family or friend or colleague or coworker and you casually hear them mention they're seeing a therapist, it's like, would you recommend that therapist, right?
Mhm.
So I think
Mhm.
there are just sort of those initial steps can be really supportive to moving forward in seeking treatment.
Mhm. Absolutely. And some folks, to your point, Katie, will offer a 15-minute free, let's just spend some time on the phone or on a Zoom call, which I'm a huge fan of. I've
Mm.
always done that. Some folks, I have a large group practice, some therapists do that, some don't. And I like your idea of don't just count people out who aren't open to doing that. But if you need more information from somebody, don't be shy about requesting. Can I just have 10 or 15 minutes of your time on the phone? I just want to see if we're going to be the right fit. It does it's best for everyone.
Yeah.
It's best for the therapist, and it's certainly best for the client and the consumer. So, Katie, what would you say are the top three things for people to be thinking about if they're kind of running up against their own internal stigmatization around therapy? What are some things they should be thinking about if they have that calling to move forward to seek some help?
Yeah. I think one of the things is paying attention to or listening to, like, what is it exactly that you're wanting help with? Like, there is that calling, and so it's sort of asking yourself, like, okay, am I wanting, sort of going back to that, like, processing or resources, or am I looking for a space to just be able to sit like human to human because I don't have anybody else that I can do that with? Am I looking for a person that I can fall apart in front of because I have to hold it all together for everybody else? So, really dropping into what is it that you're looking for? Because sometimes, well, really early on with a therapist, like they are going to ask that. They're going to probably in your first one or two first session or second session, they're going to sort of say, like, do you have a sense of what you're looking for? Are there goals that you're looking for us to support? The second being practicalities. So practicalities can be a barrier to access. So, if you can only work with a therapist on Mondays, that's the only day that you could see a therapist. That's really important communication, I would say, in the very beginning, right? So if you're reaching out to a therapist, fill out their contact form, say like, "Hey, I'm looking to work with a therapist." And to be clear, I can only see somebody on a Monday. Like that's really important information for that therapist to have. Because if that therapist doesn't have any availability on Monday, okay, then you can move on. So the practicalities are really important. And I also would say cost and finances, considering how you want to engage with therapy. Do you want to pay out of pocket? Do you want to utilize your insurance? Do you need a sliding scale? Sort of looking at how do you understand that it is a resource, right? A time resource, a financial resource that you're probably going to have to dedicate in some way. And so looking for how do I solve for that? If finances or resources are, unstable right now, how can I make this work? So really looking at what is your copay? What is your insurance? Does your insurance cover mental health therapy? And I just also want to name, going back to stigma, going back to lack of knowledge, lots and lots and lots of insurances do cover mental health therapy now. So if somebody's barrier is, I don't know if it will cover mental health therapy, it really now is as simple as look at the back of your insurance card, call the 800 number, and simply ask, do I have mental health coverage? And I would say that has been one area of activism, one area of access that has really moved forward in the past 10 years.
Hmm. Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that, Katie, because that is so true. And it came about, whether we like the Affordable Care Act or we don't, that was
Yeah.
something that came about. Prior to that, it was not unusual for policies to cover maybe 6 months worth of therapy a year. And then that was it. And lots of policies didn't cover mental health at all. And now there are states that mandate
Yeah.
that within that state, mental health is covered. So we've come a long way, thank
Mm.
goodness. So, Katie Babcock, thank you so much for coming back again and sharing your wisdom. I look forward to connecting with you another time. And if our listeners want to connect with you, how can they find you? And we'll have it in the show notes, folks. But what's the best way to get you?
Absolutely. So they can go to my website, counselingforprofessionals.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Katie Babcock. I'm on Instagram, Katie Babcock. I'm on Facebook as Katie Babs. So you could just Google search my name and you can find me in multiple places and spaces.
Wonderful. Well, folks, please do that. Katie has a wonderful way of being in the world, very kind, very smart. One therapist to another. Believe me, I do assess these
Uh,
things in fellow therapists. So I say that with all sincerity. So,
oh, thank you.
Katie, thank you very much. And all of you who are listening, thank you for joining us. Go get yourself the help you need. Be well.